Okay, so this part, which you see here, this is actually a very thin cable running back to the front of the radio and up all the way to the button mechanics. And as far as I can tell, this mechanical piece, which you see here, is used to switch between bands, in my opinion. Now, as you can tell, this is a very sensitive piece of mechanics, and if it's not well oiled and cleaned, it's probably going to break, and it's probably also not extremely accurate either. Or maybe I should say it is accurate, and because it hasn't been looked at for years and years, chances are that if I don't, if anybody doesn't take the pains to clean it, you know, then it might break or it might simply not work. Okay, so what else do we see? Well, we see a heck of a lot of coils and these little trimmer caps, which are typical for the 50s. You know, it's a little hood you can turn up or down, and by that changing the capacity of this trimmer cap. But like you can see, as you can see, it's also full of coils. Now, honestly, I'm not very keen on doing anything inside this part because it's high frequency, and well, as you know, this has probably been set in the factory, and by judging by the looks of it, it might still be okay. As a side note, you can see the metal is glistening. Now, this metal is probably covered with a layer of cadmium, and the cadmium has crystallized, funnily enough. It might be aluminum, but I wouldn't bet my life on it. But it is definitely metal. My best guess is it's steel with a cadmium layer on top. Okay, there are some big caps, like this one, which are probably paper caps. Those would need changing. You know, there are some other caps like these. Well, they will need looking after. There are also a few electrolytics like this one, and I bet my life on it that this electrolytic and the other ones inside this cabinet are not good any longer. So those electrolytics will definitely need to go. Okay, well then there's this thing here, and it's attached to a little prong on the chassis. So my guess is this is a kind of a, well, I don't know, like grounding terminal for something, but I found it floating around. My guess is it was probably attached like this. But why anybody would want to attach a ground connector to a wooden case, that's anybody's guess. So I will need to find out what this is for too, obviously, if I decide to repair this radio. Okay, so now if we look down into the guts on the other side, you can see there are also a lot of classical resistors, like this one, for example. As far as I can tell, it has a value printed on it, but no color coding. So that might take a bit to decipher. And then there are some peculiar things, like this, for example, this connection there. Now that connection is probably just what it is, a connection, but possibly it might be a type of capacitor. It is a specialty part, and well, that's the kind of part you really don't want to touch because it's probably extremely sensitive. You can also see the base of one of the IF coils down there. So and there are quite a few of IF coils in this radio, or on this chassis, I should say. I count at least 3, as far as I can tell. So yep, it's definitely going to be a complicated thing to work on. Also, the wires between all the parts are extremely thin, as you can tell here. These wires are incredibly thin. So that will add another dimension of complexity working to it, or on it. So, well, like I said, I'm not wildly enthusiastic about it, but it might be interesting. Okay, so what I need to do now is try to get the chassis out of the cabinet. Now, to do that, I need to unmount these screws. There are 4 screws, one here, one there, one here, and one there. So there are 4 screws in all, holding the chassis down onto the bottom plate of the cabinet. Unfortunately, to do that, I need to find a way to unscrew the buttons, and believe it or not, in between those 2 buttons, and I think this is the tuning button, in between those there's a space, and somewhere in this space there's a tiny little screw screwing on this button, holding on this button onto a shaft. So without damaging the bezel you see here, I need to be able to put a screwdriver in between those 2 buttons and undo that screw. Now that's going to be quite a task, because I already had a look, and if you take a look, this is a small screwdriver, and you see, that's my problem. Yeah, so I will probably have to do it from the side like this, which makes it a little bit harder to do. Okay, so anyway, give me a moment to undo the buttons, and then let's have a look if we can undo the chassis from the cabinet.